chapter 8 in the textbook looks at integrating the support. So you've gone out, you've gotten some good research, you've got some good information, you're ready to figure out, now how am I going to put all this together and create this speech? So we're going to look in this chapter at the types of support and look at examples, explanations and descriptions, definitions, analogies, statistics. Also going to begin talking about citing your sources. The book talks a little bit about it. I'm going to go into greater detail, but we're actually going to hit on that in a different module. Because there are this is probably the most awkward thing that students do during their speech, is orally citing their sources and figuring out, well, how much do I put? What do I include? What don't I include? It doesn't, it sounds like I just need to, I'm kind of all tongue-tied. So we're going to talk a little bit about citing your sources. So how do we support a speech? So a speech needs to be kind of infused with supports that you want to amplify, you want to clarify, you want to make it vivid for people. You want your topic to come alive for your audience. So to avoid having this speech that falls flat, it's important that you search diligently for supporting material, and then you elaborate on, prove, or enliven your points. If we just say, well, today I'm going to talk to you about this and that and that, and we keep everything all just very dry and fact-based, it's hard to get excited as a listener about that. So we want to try to put all this information together. Now, there are a variety of ways we can do this. We could use examples. We use these to support specific points to help engage the audience. So by giving a specific example of something, explanations and descriptions, we can use this to clarify, also to invoke a sensory response. Think about that figurative language that you learned about in English class. Definitions, to explain words and concepts. If you use words that we don't understand, we're not going to take much away from your speech message. An analogy, this is where you compare and contrast one thing to another thing. Statistics, of course, are numbers. Hey, statistics sound good, right? If you know anything about statistics, you know there are all kind of ways that we can represent numbers. Something I'll say, if you're using numbers outside of just maybe one number, maybe as an attention getter or something, it's best to have a visual aid that goes with that. It's hard for us to keep track of a lot of numbers just coming at us, so if we have a visual aid, that's always helpful. And testimony. This helps to increase believability and credibility. Remember, we talked about interviewing. Wow, if we could get some testimony from that expert witness or that expert person that we talked to, that would be fantastic to help support our speech. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit more. Examples. There could be short examples and there could be extended examples. More than likely, you're going to be looking at the short examples, so I'll focus on that. These support a specific main point. It's no longer than a couple sentences whenever we use them. It helps it to gain power. Narratives are probably one of the biggest things you're going to use. I tell students in the persuasive speech, one of the best things to use, and as an attention getter, is a narrative. It's a story. A story is an example. It may be real. It may not be real. It can be a hypothetical example, and that's okay too. Stories will bring your audience in. At the end of the day, we are storytelling creatures. We've told stories for centuries and centuries. And so that is a great thing to use as an attention getter, as something within your speech to help us connect to your topic idea. Okay. Another thing we can use are explanations and descriptions. An explanation clarifies what was previously stated. So let's say that you give, I often have students do speeches about texting and driving or distracted driving. And so they'll, say, okay, well, texting for 10 seconds is, like going, so many yards without, being blindfolded. And so, okay, that helps me understand a little bit. But if I said, and make it more vivid, texting for 7 seconds is like driving the length of a football field with a blindfold on. That sounds a little bit different than just saying, 100 yards. So we can use those explanations and descriptions. It helps to create kind of a visual imagery. We watched Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. He was well skilled at creating this, visual imagery by using figurative language. Okay, something else we can look at, definitions. This goes without saying. This is important that you define any words which may not be understood by the audience. Always we're adapting our speech to the audience. If you're using some technical language, and I don't often have students doing this, but let's say that you're doing, maybe you're, in the nursing program and you're doing a speech about some type of a medical thing. You want to make sure that you break that down. We can't assume that everybody knows all the words that we're using. So being sure to define those words. Analogy. This is where you can take information and again can use some of those figurative analogies or those literal analogies to compare and contrast. Let's say that for a literal one, you're comparing two things from similar things. Figurative, comparing two things that are dissimilar. Think about, if you remember, similes and metaphors, where you're doing that and you're trying to, again, a horror movie is like a fairy tale on steroids. There would be trying to make an analogy between a horror movie and a fairy tale. You can use different types of things to compare or to pull it back to something. Okay. Statistics. This is something that I see students that will use more. This probably is much more evident in the persuasive speech than in the informative speech. But you may hear words like mean, median, mode. I'm not going to get into a lot of this. Some of you maybe have or have not had statistics classes, but the mean would be the average. So if you are reading something and it says the mean, that means the average. Now let's say that you are going to be using these numbers. First of all, be sure that you understand what the numbers mean. If you're not sure, ask somebody for some help. I have no problem with looking at information and I can help with that. Also, as I said before, it's best to incorporate a visual aid. Let's say you're going to use a chart or a graph or something like that. So you have a lot of numbers. If I can have a visual aid that goes with that while I'm talking, nothing that's too complicated, something that's fairly simple, that will help the audience understand. Okay, testimony. This is, opinions of others that support main points. Now, they can be effective if the audience is going to deem the source of the opinion as credible. So you need to be careful about how you're using testimony. So we have expert testimony. This is recognized as authorities. 4 out of 5 dentists recommend. We use this all the time in commercials. Testimony from these experts. Also, peer or lay testimony, opinions of others. Hey, I've been using this toothpaste for, 3 years and look at how white my teeth are. So this is somebody who's been using it. Speaker's got to identify the source of the testimony. So if you're going to use testimony, and I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of students do this, but if you're going to, make sure the person that you're using that's giving the testimony would be considered to be someone who would be good in the eyes of the audience. Okay, so a variety of different ways that we can, and types of information that we can use to help balance out our speech, to give it's kind of the glue then that holds the speech together. It kind of gives us that whole complete, or maybe like the icing on the cake, other than just having dry information from these sources. The things that I see students using the most, of course, are going to be statistics. I always encourage examples through story or through narrative, especially in the persuasive speech. I don't often see students using necessarily a lot of testimony or analogies, but those are things that are available to you if it makes sense for your topic. And I'm going to talk very briefly about citing your sources, but as I said, this is a whole, I'm going to talk a whole lot more about this in a couple weeks. So you have this great information. You're going to use this. You're going to have a list of works cited at the end of your preparation outline. You're going to use MLA or APA format. You're going to write this right into your outline. We'll be talking about how to outline. We're not going to write essays for this. That's not how what we do to create a speech, but you're going to put this information in there. So what do you put? Because not only do you have to put that in your outline, you're going to have to say it during your speech, and it's going to sound pretty awkward because most people are not used to doing this. These are something called oral citations. Oral citations are how you reveal the source of your information and explain why it is credible. So it's going to include perhaps the author's name. Perhaps you don't always have an author's name. Perhaps the title of the information. This could be a title, maybe use an article. It could be a title from a website. Maybe there is no title. Maybe it's information from some website that you got. Maybe it's information from the Centers for Disease Control. Maybe it's, so we want to give enough information information. We want to know the credentials of the author. When I say author and look at the CRAP worksheets, people often think it just has to be a person, and that is not true. A lot of information that is on the internet now is created by organizations. The organization is the author, so there's no one called John Smith that's listed as the author. So you're really evaluating the credentials of the organization responsible for the website. The publisher, when was it published? Sometimes you have this, sometimes you don't. It's important that you kind of, think about when, was it new, was it old? All right, so we're going to review. Your book does have information about oral citations. It's in Chapter 8. You can go ahead and review that. I have information in the course. In the resource module for the speech assignment resources, there's a whole sub-module. There are guides about oral citations, kind of bad ways to do it, getting better, and okay, this is great. I want you to look at that in the outline guides, and then there's going to be a whole other unit I'll talk about oral citations. All right, so just to summarize, we've addressed, there are different things you can use with the speech: examples, explanations, definitions, analogies, statistics. Some of these are more common than others, but using one of these in a speech can really kind of help give some, nice icing on top of the cake of a speech. And citing your sources, very important. We'll talk about that more in a bit.